Hello and welcome to the Gemhawks YouTube channel. I hope you're having a beautiful day today. For the free tutorial on YouTube today, we're going to create these half hoop drop earrings. I've made mine in mixed metals and I've used one of these beautiful heart-shaped beads, which I will demonstrate how you can stop from spinning around using just a piece of wire rather than a head pin later on. But the main focus of today's tutorial is fun with hammers. We're going to make this half hoop design which attaches to any standard earring wire of your choice. So let's just pop those up to the corner. I'm going to be demonstrating with some beads, some standard beads as well, to show you alternatives for the drop part. But to begin with, we're going to go about creating these half hoops up at the top. Today I'm working with raw copper wire, which is fairly medium temper. It's a 1.25mm gauge or 16 gauge, and I have two 2.5-inch lengths. So the first thing that we need to do is just to make sure that both of those are nice and smooth and as straight as possible to start with. We're going to give that a lovely warm through to begin with. And I'm going to try to work on both of them side by side as much as possible so that we can create two pieces which are very similar in their shape. So I'm going to be using a miniature block from our friends at Impress Art. And I'm also going to be using the world's teeniest, tiniest hammer. This is, I think, about a £1/4 hammer. It's very tiny indeed. So you don't need to have great big chasing hammers or professional jewellers' hammers. You can use almost a little toffee hammer if that's all you have access to. So if you're working like I am on a desk, just go steady with the striking. And what we're trying to do is to keep those two end pieces, they're both flush cut, close together, side by side, so that we cause the same amount of deviation on the end there. I'm going to free up around about ½ an inch from the very end of that wire, and I'm going to strike ever so slightly, tilting in this direction so that there's slightly more airspace at the open end of that cut. What we're looking to do is to cause that wire to just flare out ever so slightly at the end. So when I draw that hammer down, I'm also striking ever so slightly away from my fingers, which is always wise. Now, it can take a little while to get the desired effect. What I'm looking for is a little bit of strike marks on the end because I want that section to sparkle. And I'll also be adding a little bit of texture on the side of these after we've formed that half hoop shape. If you struggle to get the ends to flare out, you can of course use a heavier hammer or just strike down at the very end. Again, I'm just making sure those are side by side. Let's take a look at what we've got. So if I move that block out of the way for now, you can see that that last ½ inch or so has ever so slightly changed shape. It's got some strike marks on it, and I actually want that today because I want to see that sparkle, a bit like diamond cutting, but without the effort. So I'm now going to grab myself a round form. If you only have a ring mandrel, then just make sure that you do these one at a time at the exact same space, or you'll end up with one ever so slightly larger than the other. I'm going to try a round form, which is the same width all the way along. Let's have a look. So this is 0.62 inch or 15.8mm. It's a little bit like a very chunky marker pen. And what we're going to do is to cause this to create that half hoop shape. We're not going to worry about the very end of the wire right now. We're just looking to get that half hoop shape just like so. So if I draw that round form back out of the way, what we need to do now is to find either round pliers, or we can use our memory wire finishing pliers, or indeed you could grab your multi-step bell makers. I'm just going to grab my round pliers now. So we're going to create a rounded form using that splayed end section. And if you wanted to use round pliers to get the same size twice, I would very much recommend putting a little bit of marker pen on your pliers so that you're able to use that as a guide for size. So I'm going to pinch the very, very end of that splayed wire away. And I'm going to start forming that around until that splayed end touches back on the continuation of the wire. And I'm going to do exactly the same thing on the other one now. So take your time to make sure that both of those are exactly the same. The easiest way to do that is to sit one on top of the other, and at that point you'll notice any slight deviation. So you'll see there's a little bit of difference here. So what we'll do is just grab those pliers and make sure that these are as identical as possible. So before I pop these back onto the block to apply some, let's go with faceting. You could call it tool marks if you prefer. What I'd like to do now is to create an upright bend coming away from that half hoop shape. So again, making sure that everything is exactly the same before we go forwards. Against how I normally use these tools, I'm going to use the outside of my bent chain nose pliers. And in doing so, I'm going to ensure that the bend I put in this wire opposite that loop down at the bottom there, it needs to be exactly the same on both of them because you're making earrings and it does pay to have them look as close to identical as possible. So I'm just going to hold that in position, decide where I want that bend to occur, and then pull up firmly as if it was a 12 o'clock position if you're looking at two half clock shapes. So you can obviously take your time to make sure that that is a perfect form. I feel like that's gone slightly out of true just there. So again, I'll pop one up on top of the other just to make sure that any adjustments I make happen to both of them in the same place. Let's just make sure that that is exactly the same place. And then you can just ensure that you're happy with how identical those are. That's much, much better. So let's add a little bit more work hardening to keep these strong in wear. And then we're also going to add a little bit of, let's go with faceting. So let's hold that on the side. Now, what the tendency of wire is to do when you have an open shape like this is as you strike down, with the best will in the world, even if you're striking down exactly from above, the shape will spread out. So what we want to do is to put some strength into the shape in the centre before we start adding some strength and cut work, if you prefer, to the outer margins of that arc. So let's just strengthen the middle bit first. That's what happens if you hit your nail. So once you've strengthened the central section, the wire is slightly less likely to spread. So let's just hold that form. And then at the end, we're not going to hammer past that bend because I want to immediately turn this into a loop. So up and to the bend on that wire curve. Now I've added some strength to the design, it's much more freestanding and able to be worn as is. Now I want to add a little bit more in terms of texture to this piece. And with the existing hammer that I have, there are multiple ways actually that you can do that. But the two ways I'm going to show you are with the sharp end of my standard toffee hammer, which is like this. I'm tapping very, very gently, but if I bring that off the block and hold it and move it in the light, you'll see there's loads of texture on there now. So I'm working with a bare copper, which means there's no coating to this, which is the ideal material to work with. You could equally work with a solid precious metal, because you won't be splitting any coating. When you work with a non-tarnish coated material, what can happen is that you will abrade that coating and it will flake. It's not very pretty unless you're going for the snake shedding its skin look. So that's one way that you can add texture, and it is a very, very gentle tap. So we've added a little bit more of those tippy-tappy marks on this side, but on the other side you can, if you prefer, use a slightly softer piece. So when you have the striking face, quite often it's a little bit more beveled than this. Let me just grab my chasing hammer. So you've got a lovely soft beveled edge on this hammer, which is wonderful for the technique I want to show you. This is probably a little bit sharp. So what we want to do is exactly the same technique as we were doing a moment ago, but because we're using a softer beveled edge, you get a slightly different effect. And if you're using this on very large pieces of metal, it almost looks like tree bark, which I think is a lovely fun design to work with. So we've added some texture to our half hoop, and in a moment I'll do that on the second piece. But what we need to do now is to turn this bend out to the side. Let's get the hammers off the board. And I'm just going to grip exactly where that angle changes. And I'm going to push that wire out to about 45 degrees in one direction. When I've completed the texturing technique on the second wire, I will have that angle going in the opposite direction, so that my earrings will be exactly symmetrically opposite to one another. So I'll be joining you back in a second once I've textured my second wire. So once you have your half hoops all lined up and as similar to one another as possible, we're just going to turn a very simple loop up at the top here. So we've got slightly more wire than we need, but it gives you the opportunity to go for slightly larger half hoops if you prefer. What I'm going to do is to just warm that through ever so slightly. As you're striking the copper on the hoop, some of that hardness travels along, something to do with electrons. I don't know, I'm not a scientist. So let's just warm that ever so slightly. And what we're looking to do is if I hold the earring like so, we're going to create a hoop that's centralised just around this point. So if I start slightly further away than I anticipate I'll need to, and just rotate that around. If you want the loop up at the top to be slightly smaller, just lift that up and continue rotating until you get the hoop of your desired size up at the top there. So I'm just going to trim that away and then give it a squish to make sure that it sits equally, that the end fits just over that angle change point. So you might like to take a second to just get that nice and strong. You could even pop that back onto the block and give it just a little bit of treatment. The idea is that it sits dead center on that wire, so that if you lay it down, let me just get that directly under the lens, it looks like it's coming up directly away from that page. So I'll do the exact same thing on the other piece in just a moment. But that's the half hoop part of our demonstration. So if I wanted to add bead drops down at the bottom, you could simply use a head pin, or you could create your very own head pin using a spiral on the end. So you can create your own head pins by applying a flame to the end of your copper or silver wire and achieving a ball head pin. As the wire melts, it will travel up into usually quite a nice little ball. I'm not terribly skilled at that, so I've made a couple of different ways in the past that you can create your own head pin, and one of them is to just have a little spiral down on the bottom. So I'm going to grab the end of its 3-inch length of 1mm or 18 gauge wire, and I'm going to create a spiral that wraps twice from that center point, from that start point. So I've started off with a circular form, and I'm just going to push that into my non-dominant hand and spin that around until I have 2 rotations from that start point. Then what I will do is grip that again, centralise that little double spiral on the end of my wire, and you have essentially a dramatic head pin with a lovely little double spiral down at the bottom. So what we're going to do now is add our bead or charm of choice, and in a moment I'll show you how I got these little heart beads to stop spinning around. If you look at the half hoop section of your earring, this is the orientation that it will come away from the body. So you can see that our hammered loop down at the base, to which we want to add our drop, is in the same orientation like so. which means that if we want to look at that spiral, we will need to have that loop coming away at 90 degrees so that those two will mesh together neatly in just a moment. Now you can of course go for wrapped loops if you prefer, but I'm just going to go for a simple loop today. So let's rotate that wire around, draw that back across, and that is a very, very simple way to create a charm drop. Trim at the point at which it meets that angle change as it comes out the top of the bead, and just take a second to straighten that up. Make sure that the cut end meets as closely as possible to that bead exit point. Give it a really good squish to make it nice and strong, and then we're going to open that up and add it into that hammered loop down at the bottom of our half hoop. All that you will need to do then is to add it into your favourite style of earring hook. So all I've done to complete this is add my favourite type of ear hook up at the top, and I've gone for really mixed metals today. There's gold ear hooks or silver ear hooks with a silver charm. So if, like me, you want to keep a mobile charm from spinning, you can use a very similar technique to just suspending that bead dropper. I have again 18 gauge or 1mm wire around about 3 inches, and we're going to start off in exactly the same way by creating a small double spiral at the one end of the wire. So let's just complete that. Push all the way around until you have that double spiral, give it a squish to make sure it's nice and strong, and then pull that wire away so that you have a little disc on the end of your new head pin. So what we're going to do differently here is to grip around about 5mm away from that angle change and put a bend in the wire. So it's fairly subtle, it's around about 90 degrees, just on the end, a little bit away from that double spiral. Then we're going to add in the bead that we don't want to spin, slide it all the way down to that angle change, and then we're just going to push this over the rear of the bead. Now these beautiful hearts, which are from Jessie James Beads Magical Mystery Bead Box for September, and if you want to check them out, I'll pop a link into the video description so you can go and see what that's all about. But if you have any bead that you want to stop from moving around, this is going to work if it's a flat puffy bead like these gorgeous hearts. So turn over, you can see the face of the bead is ready and willing to continue on its way. So what we're going to do with this one is a small wrapped loop. So I'm going to push the wire away sideways and leave a gap for my wire to just spin around. So draw that all the way around. Now if you wanted to add this into the loop at the bottom of your hammered half hoop, now would be a good time to do it, making sure that if you do have a forward face, you might actually prefer to even see that small spiral over the front of the bead. But if you do have a preference, make sure that you get that on the right way round. Close that small loop up whilst it's in position, grip across. There will be space for you to grip across that loop without damaging the hammered loop where we started, and then just bring that tail around to fill the gap. And once you've popped that all the way down into position, I'm working with a scrap of wire so it's a little bit tense. I'm just going to grip across that loop now and bring that tail all the way around the core wire that went through the centre of that bead. And we're going to further stabilise it by bringing this tail as far down as we can get it. So with a heart-shaped bead, that works really, really well, because the little wrap will then sit inside the cleft of those two lobes of the heart. So just pull that down into position, and then your heart bead, once it's suspended, will always face the direction that you want it to face. There will be a little bit of mobility, but you can stop it from completely turning round, which is really handy if you have a puffy or a flat bead which has a particular face that you want to have visible at all times. So that's the half hoop drop earrings. I hope that you've enjoyed playing with hammers with me today. My name is Gem Hawks. Please do subscribe to the channel if you want to see more content. I upload a brand new video tutorial once a week on a Tuesday. And if you're enjoying the content, please don't forget to leave a like, share the video, or turn on the notification bell, as it really does help the channel to get out there. Thanks so much for watching, and bye for now.